Hello, so this is going to be a video where I try and set things straight a bit with asbestos filters when it comes to Warsaw PACT masks. So we're not looking at World War II masks in the video, we're looking at Warsaw PACT and Soviet masks, and more importantly the filters. Now, obviously there's lots of hysteria regarding asbestos in Soviet filters, and it's obviously been confirmed GP5 filters do contain asbestos. We've spoken about this a very long time ago. However, what I want to do in this video is basically say which filters we know for definite contain asbestos, which are likely but we don't know, and which filters are safe. But there's not going to be any guaranteed safe filters in this video. So basically, what this isn't going to be like Israeli filters are safe and stuff like that. You know, this is going to be, let's look at the really common Cold War filters and have a look and see, do we know them to contain asbestos or not. So what I'm going to do is show you the first filters that we know for guaranteed, certainty contain asbestos, the GP5 and the GP5's filter. That's the important bit, the filter. The green one that says GP5 in Cyrillic on it. So this is the one that's guaranteed to contain asbestos, because every time one of these filters gets tested, it doesn't matter when the date is, they always come back asbestos positive. I've heard that there may have been one that didn't, and that's more like the Soviet factory on the day of making it decided they didn't have enough asbestos to justify putting it in the filter. So let me get this open, and this is really tough at the moment. There we go. The asbestos in these is in the particulate layer that you might be able to see there. Looks like a HEPA filter that's kind of brown and paper mache looking. Now, the talc you get in these masks is not asbestos, let me stress that. Lots of people keep saying my mask got asbestos in it, it's talc. The asbestos is the particulate layer at the front here. Now, if the filter is working properly and it hasn't broken down, the asbestos is perfectly safe because it's trapped in there. You can't breathe it in. It would have to get through the charcoal layer if it did break down, and then through the cotton layer on the top. Let me just show you that. It would also have to get through this cotton layer. But bear in mind, most of these filters are from the 60s, 70s or 80s. So the probability is something might have broken down on the inside. And do you really want to risk inhaling asbestos for the sake of wearing your outdated Soviet filter, which wouldn't really protect you from anything? I think the answer is no. So let me just put the plug back in this. However, these filters as it stands are perfectly safe to have around the house, especially if they plugged up like that. They're not going to leak asbestos anywhere. Whatever you do, don't throw these filters in the regular sort of trash bin, anything like that, rubbish bin, because if these get crushed or something by dustbin lorries, that kind of thing, you'll contaminate people with asbestos when it's crushed. Also, don't cut the filter open unless you really know what you're doing and you're taking all the precautions, because you're going to expose people in your household to asbestos. Because, it's perfectly safe when it's contained in the filter. It may or may not be safe to breathe through these, depending on how degraded the filter is on the inside, which you really can't tell prior to, doing any of that. Because as I was saying, in theory, if everything in the filter was built okay, it will be fine. Lots of people do this really stupid thing where they say, well, I knew somebody who breathed through that filter and they're fine. Yes, because the filter might not have broken down. That doesn't mean that it isn't nasty stuff in the filter if it does break down and you inhale it. When these were made, asbestos filters were perfectly safe, not because asbestos is safe, but because the filter itself hasn't broken down and doesn't pose any health risk to you. So there you go. The actual filters themselves are perfectly safe when they were made. They are not perfectly safe to breathe through now. Some may be, depending on the condition, but some may not be. I also heard people say, well, because it's only 1 or 2% asbestos, that's fine. No, because if you get asbestos in your lungs, that does permanent lung damage. It doesn't matter if it's only a tiny amount. It's obviously an accumulative thing. If you worked in a job handling asbestos day in, day out, you're more likely to die of lung cancers and things like that associated with asbestos. But saying, oh, I've only got a tiny bit of asbestos in my lungs, therefore it's okay, is a stupid argument to make. So, as we have covered many times, GP5 filters are not safe. These are ones that have been proven to contain asbestos. So hopefully you can understand what I'm saying. They may or may not be safe to breathe through, depending on the condition of the filter, but the filter medium itself is not safe. I've also heard lead paint was used in these, which again is not good to really breathe, especially if some of it cracks off. So, really, unless you need to breathe through a GP5 filter, don't do it. I said, don't have a panic if you buy a GP5, the mask is perfectly safe. Don't connect the filter to it. Leave the filter sealed up in your GP5 bag and then, you know, your actual GP5, do what you want with it. Get an FP5 filter or something modern and safe, put it on there, and you've got a working mask with a safe filter. But please don't breathe through the GP5 filter. Okay, so what is the other sort of Warsaw Pact Soviet Cold War filter we know that is not safe? Okay, the next lot of filters we know are not safe are these EO65 or EO16 filters, known as the coffee can filter. These are really cool looking filters, don't get me wrong. I actually kind of want to get some more of these, but obviously they are not safe to breathe through. Now, asbestos was confirmed from these much earlier on in the GP5 filters. The reason we know that there's asbestos in these is that the Russian manuals for these specified that they would have asbestos in it. There was like an ingredients list some people found in old Soviet documents. Once translated, it was like 2 to 5% asbestos, something like that. Again, like with the GP5 filter, it's only a couple of percent because it's mixed in a compound. It's not like there's a sheet of asbestos in here. What they did is they kind of did this paper mache type stuff, where asbestos was mixed with paper, probably some cotton, stuff like that, to make a HEPA filter. Again, if the filter was in perfect condition and you breathe through it, there is no risk to you because the asbestos cannot be inhaled. The issue is that, again, when was this filter made? 1985. So, again, this filter is quite old, relatively, and is this filter in perfect condition? Well, I don't know. When I used this, I purposely did a thing where I put a particulate layer, P3 particulate filter, in front of this bit connecting to the mask or the hose. That way, there is no risk of inhaling asbestos because it's trapped inside. So, again, this is one of these things where if everything's good and cosy and perfect, the filter is perfectly safe because the asbestos cannot escape from the filter. There's no risk, especially if it's plugged, having it in your house. The issue is, as these degrade, and especially if you're breathing through them, you risk the chance of pulling asbestos through the filter and into your lungs. Once that asbestos is in your lungs, it's not getting out. So, as said, these are definitely known not to be safe because the manuals for the filter actually specified that asbestos was used in them. If an asbestos test was done on it, they would find that asbestos was used in them. But as and when it stands today, the same logic applies as the GP5 filter. Unless you really want to use it, don't use it, keep it plugged, or find a way of converting it to make it safe. Don't cut it open and expose everybody to asbestos by cutting it open. They are cool filters, I really like the look of these, but sadly they are not safe to breathe through. Because if it's degraded ever so slightly on the inside, you risk inhaling that asbestos that's inside the filter and getting it in your lungs where it won't come out. It will scar your lungs and it can lead to mesalamine, if I'm pronouncing that right, mesalammonia, however it's pronounced, and a whole heap of other lung issues. Yes, these filters look cool, don't breathe through them. Okay, so this is where things get a little tricky. We have EO14 filters now, and this is where I have had no confirmation either way if these contain asbestos. My personal logic would be don't breathe through old filters, because even if this doesn't contain asbestos, again, with old filters you still risk other things inside the filter turning sort of into dust or breaking down and being inhaled, which still isn't good for your lungs even if it's not as bad as asbestos. The same logic applies to a modern filter. Let's say you bought a filter that's only a year old, the particulate layer in the top rips, you inhale through that filter, you inhale charcoal dust and other such nasty stuff, maybe stuff that was impregnated into the charcoal, like chromium, maybe bits of the particulate filter that have broken down. Obviously over time they break down far more, but the issue is if you still had a damaged filter and you breathe through it, it would be bad for you. So, again, EO14 filters, we don't know what's in them because there's not been any documents translated to say what was in them, and I've never seen any test results done on these. So again, this is one of those cases of there's the particulate filter. If there's asbestos in there, it will be in there. Now the interesting thing of these Polish EO14 filters is the HEPA particulate filter looks far more like that on a modern mask. But again, that is not an accurate way of doing it, saying, oh, this looks okay, therefore it is okay. If you get these, personally, I would not recommend breathing through them. Again, like the coffee can filters, they are cool looking. But for your own sake, I wouldn't recommend it. But like this is what I'm saying, I can't confirm there is asbestos, and I cannot confirm that there's not asbestos in this. My recommendation is simply don't use it. You know, they look cool, but don't use it. You know, they may or may not be safe, I don't know, but they're quite old. So, personally, I wouldn't use it. Right, now for two that are even muddier with if they are safe or not, and I will get those now. So, this is where, as I was saying, it gets confusing. Here we have on in my left hand I have a Polish MC1, and this has what I think is called the MS4 filter on it, and yes, it is an MS4 filter. And here we have a Czechoslovakian CM3 with whatever the Czech filter was called that these were issued with, another Czechoslovakian civil defence style masks were issued with. So let me get the actual filters off of the masks to start with, so you can get a better idea of what the filters themselves look like. So both these filters have a very similar reputation, basically. These are one where some people shout they have asbestos, some people claim they are perfectly safe, and there's been no tests done on them that have ever been published, as far as I'm aware of, to, you know, show either way, do they or do they not contain asbestos. So both of them have your generic particulate layer that you can't really see on either of them at the front end, which may or may not be safe, who knows. Then they have your activated charcoal in a section of the filter, then they've got another particulate layer on each to keep it in. Now what is very interesting with the Polish one is it feels like there's a particulate layer under that, and then they've put an additional particulate layer on top. This looks like that kind of fiberglassy cotton weave stuff that is safe. Asbestos does not look like that, okay? But again, I've heard people saying there's asbestos in this. And again, I've said things like I wouldn't trust it because it's from the Warsaw Pact era when, you know, everything was kind of standardised, and that was where they used a lot of actual asbestos in things. However, it's not been proven. And this is what I kind of want to get at. It's obviously use at your own risk and everything, but it's not been proven, because I've seen people shouting that's an asbestos filter, and my logic is, well, it could be or it couldn't be, but we've not got proof either way, and it's up to you whether you use it or not. So the good thing about especially the MS4 filter is it does have an additional particulate layer at the top. So what that means obviously is that whatever's trapped in there is trapped by an additional particulate layer. I'd feel a lot more comfortable wearing this one than this one actually. But again, another thing I've seen with these is often masks can be sold where either of these two filters are on them despite them not being Polish or Czechoslovakian masks. For example, I've seen Draeger M65 sold with either of these filters on before, you know, and other masks. If a surplus seller's probably got a lot of one of these filters in, they might ship a mask out with random ones of these filters. So, again, are these safe or dangerous? I don't know. There's not been an asbestos test on them I've ever found. These obviously aren't made exactly the same as the Russian filters or the Soviet filters. You can tell that by looking at them, you know, bits are different on them and everything else. Would I personally use them? Only if I really had to. But again, like I'm saying, I don't know if either of these filters, if they do contain asbestos or not. There's never been a test done on them. If there has been a test, please link me, and it has to be a proper, you know, like signed report type one that's scanned in. I don't want somebody saying I had them tested and they had asbestos in, because that's anecdotal evidence and there's no proof to it. However, like I said, both of these filters, they may or may not be safe, who knows. As I said, personally, I wouldn't use them unless I had to. But they're not GP5 filters or EO16 filters that are confirmed to contain asbestos. These are ones that may or may not, so use at your discretion and use common sense. And lastly, in this video we're going to cover this mask. I'm also going to mention the other Warsaw PACT cheek filter masks. These are other ones where people have said, do they contain asbestos? Again, there's been no reports on it, so how do we know? Like I've personally said, because, especially with this one, the PBF, other Soviet masks are known to contain asbestos, at least the EO16 and the GP5 filters, and I'd assume the bigger versions of the GP5 filters, which might have been EO18K filters, I can't remember, but basically, you'll know what I mean, it's like the filter that came with the PMG. It was like a chunkier GP5 filter, which basically just had more charcoal in, as far as I'm aware. Because we know that a lot of Soviet filters did contain asbestos, and the Soviets mined a lot of asbestos, you know, personally I wouldn't really trust these filters. Now again, if I had no choice and I wanted to wear a mask, then sure, why not? Especially if there was contaminants I knew were in the air, I'd rather risk it and use these filters than breathe in the contaminants. Because as I've tried to explain before, if an asbestos filter, even if it's got asbestos in, is working fine, the asbestos doesn't leak, and you're fine. But my point is, I wouldn't really want to do this. And can breathe through those filters if I didn't have to. I know I just did it for the video, but they weren't on very long, but you get my point. Now, again, like I said, don't dissect these at home and try and speculate whether there's asbestos in it, because whether there's asbestos or not, you're putting very small particles into the air which you'll breathe in and probably damage your lungs. If you need to get filters checked for asbestos, you send them off to a lab, pay them a load of money, they'll give you a proper report if there's asbestos on them or not. Obviously that destroys the filters, but then you're doing everybody else a service because you've told them if there's asbestos in it. So as I was saying, same goes for like the Czech M10, the Polish MP4 and all these sort of masks. Did they use asbestos in the filters? Who knows? If the filters are intact, they are perfectly safe to breathe through, but I wouldn't really recommend it. That's the point I want to keep getting at, but this applies, as I said, not just to asbestos filters, but old gas mask filters wherever. The safest thing you can do is, if you can get new filters, always use new filters with a mask, because there's the least likely chance that there's anything risky in it and that risky thing is leaking. As I said, there's a big scale of chromium. As I've explained, I'm not too worried about chromium simply for the reason I've looked into a lot of the medical reports of it, and unlike asbestos, it's one of those things that you have to inhale loads and loads and loads of it to actually do damage to you, more than you'll get in a typical gas mask filter. So it's one of those things where it's not good to breathe, I definitely agree with that, but in the grand scheme of things, it's like lots of the things where you're at a cancer risk. It's like, you know, if you smell burnt smoke and burnt toast enough, apparently that can give you lung cancer. It's like a 0.1% chance of it. It's kind of like that. Asbestos is one of those things, if you get it in your lungs, it will cause you permanent lung damage, which may lead to cancer, but it may just lead to permanent lung damage. Some of these other things are, they may or may not cause problems if you inhale massive quantities that you'd never get from a gas mask filter. So, as far as I'm concerned, as long as your M10, M17, oh, I know the M17's American, it contains chromium but not asbestos, but so, scratch the M17. As long as your M10, your Polish MP4, your Bulgarian PDE1 filters, as long as none of those are leaking, they should be safe to wear. I'd be a bit more cautious about the PBF because it was made in the Soviet Union and they sure love their asbestos, but at the same time, if you need it for an actual emergency, I'd rather wear this and not have a mask on. But as for the safety of the filters, we can't really guarantee it, so just use common sense. That's what I want to get at. Use common sense. We know with GP5 filters and the EO16 filters, they definitely contain asbestos. Lots of people do this thing. A surplus seller was selling them to me and they said they didn't contain asbestos, so you're wrong, they don't contain asbestos. Well, you're winning your Darwin Award right there. If somebody is selling you something, they have an interest to say their product is safe. Lots of good sellers will actually say, I know there's asbestos in this, so I'm not going to sell it, or if I sell it, I will put a warning on it to say it's probably best not to breathe through it. With some of the other stuff, it's not known, and again, it's not really fair for the surplus sellers if you're saying this hasn't been proven to be totally safe and I'm buying this old weird military stuff anyway, which of course, you know, might not be totally safe. That's the nature of it. You should not sell this stuff. That's really unfair. You should have common sense and knowledge with respirators that old filters in general, wherever they might come from, may not be safe. There's far more risk, even say, I'd much rather breathe through a GP5 filter for an hour than breathe through a World War II asbestos filter for 10 minutes. You know, that's what I'm getting at here. But the thing is, use common sense. If you can just put modern, safe filters in a mask that will accept them and use those. For masks like this, I'd say they're more of a prop than anything, aren't they? Because they're cheap filters, they're all expired anyway. If you are going to breathe through it, do it sensibly. But this is what I want to get at. There's filters that we know to contain asbestos from the Cold War period, and there's ones we can speculate about. Until I see proper reports, I would suggest using common sense. So there we have it. Hopefully this video is helpful. It's been a bit of a long-winded one to do. I know some people hate these asbestos videos, but it's one of my most frequently asked questions. It's worth going back to now and then. So, to just sum it up, GP5 filters contain asbestos. We've seen lots and lots of reports on those to confirm that they contain asbestos. EO16 filters contain asbestos. They have been banned in several countries and the actual manuals for them said they contain asbestos. EO14 filters we don't really know about. I'd use the same logic of they maybe contain asbestos, don't breathe through them. But if the filter is in good condition, the asbestos won't leak out. And bear in mind, as well as EO14, there are lots of similar looking canister filters from the Cold War era all around the Eastern Bloc, which may or may not contain asbestos, and they're not all identical to each other, so bear that in mind. When it comes to cheek filter masks, as said, most of these filters are long since expired anyway. I'm not a fan of cheek filter masks. Use your common sense. When it comes to the Czechoslovakian and Polish 40mm sort of GOST filters from the Cold War, that are the smaller ones, use your common sense again. I've not seen any reports either way, just lots and lots of speculation. Personally, I would use a modern filter. For example, if you've got one of those old masks, I'd recommend putting an FP5 filter on it, not one of the old GOST ones. But that's just me. You know, where I have all these masks in my collection, I try and use common sense. But what my point is that a lot of this is just speculation. Use common sense. Thank you.